What's up, everybody? Does your life suck? Or maybe you're a pessimist, or better yet, a realist. You know, well, you're in luck because today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to be optimistic if you would actually want to be optimistic. Or maybe you just hate optimistic people and you want to know how
Yeah.
not to be one of them. You could do everything the opposite of what we're saying. This is the Existential Stoic podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. What's up, Danny?
What's up, Randy? I didn't think about that. It's also an episode about how to be pessimistic, just invert all
Yeah.
this stuff.
Some people hate optimists, and there was a time in my life.
Yeah.
There was a time in my life when I vehemently hated optimists. Like anyone who thought that the sun shone out of wherever, I hated them. I just wanted to be miserable.
Yeah. No, I get that. Yeah, I think when we are miserable, we want to be miserable and around miserable people,
They say they
But
say it loves company.
it does. It's funny though. I think there is a difference between like people that are like bubbly and like everything's great versus like thinking that like the future is going to be good or better. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, I feel like that's a different type of optimism where it's just like, that motivation, keep it going
Well,
kind of
you make a
optimism.
good point, and it's also like as if we actually know if things are good or bad. We
Yeah, I
think
mean,
that
no
things are
clue.
good or bad, but as if we actually know.
It's about one of my favorite things Nietzsche says. He said, like, he's like talking about making the judgment that existence is either good or bad. He's like, you can't make this judgment. You're an interested party. Like, how can we make a judgment about the value of existence when that's the only thing we know? It makes no sense. Like, how the
Uh,
hell can we be objective about it and actually
well,
say it's good or bad?
But dude, that's a
You
great
know?
point because then when you're feeling really shitty about life, you're like, but I'm an interested party. I can't
Yeah,
make that judgment. Yeah, that's crazy.
yeah.
I like that. So we're going to share each three tips for how to be optimistic, or for those of you who want to
That's
learn how to
right.
be pessimistic, you can just do the opposite of what we say, and then you'll be
Okay.
pessimistic. All
Yeah.
right. So my first one for how to be optimistic is stop being realistic. All right. So a lot of people, they're like, I'm not a pessimist. I'm not optimist. I'm just a realist. And I call bullshit. That is absolute garbage. You are
Yeah.
100% a pessimist if you call yourself a realist. Because if you're not optimistic, you're a pessimist. You can call it
Yeah.
realism because you're like, but this is real life. And it's like, well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's just your interpretation of life. So I would say that stop being realistic. If you think you're a realistic person, uh-uh. You gotta err on the side of optimism.
No, I think you make a good point though, which is like, because they always say that we're like, studies will come out and they'll be like, oh, people that are more negative are more realistic. And it's like, well, how do you know that? We don't know we have no idea what's real. All this is a construct. It's all like made up.
And people are like,
And
but I watch the news. I know what's real. And it's like,
yeah,
oh, that's the biggest plate of garbage you'll ever eat.
yeah, it is, and I think that's part of it. It's like, there's so many things in everyday experience that shows us that like it's what we focus on, it's what we choose to pay attention to, and so it is a choice. And I think you have to realize that, like, so it is a choice to either be one or the other, and to admit that if you're choosing not optimism, you're basically choosing pessimism. That's
Mm-hmm.
it. I
Yeah.
like that one. That's a good one.
All
I
right.
think we do need to stop being so damn realistic. All
Yeah.
right, my first one is I think actually kind of goes sort of along with this, but it's like practicing self-awareness and really keeping in mind the dichotomy of control, which we've talked about before. Like, I think really reminding yourself what's within your power, what is honestly within your control, and what's honestly without of your control or out of your control is crucial, because so much I think of what we are negative and pessimistic about is really stuff that we can't really influence. It's like, that somebody made a choice about who to hire and I wasn't picked, or like, that things didn't work out a certain way, even though I did everything I could. Like, the honest answer is like, have I done everything I actually can do? And if I did, then that should be enough, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah, that's a great one. It's like keeping your mind on your own business because all the time we're in other people's
Yeah.
business or like the universe or God's business, whatever it is, and we're cursing those fates when there's literally nothing we can do about it. So that's a great one.
Yeah.
My next
You're up.
one is for how to be optimistic is always talk positive about the weather and about your health. So like these are small talk activities that people always talk about. They always talk about the weather, they always talk about their health, and almost always They're willing to point out the negative. They're like, oh, it's too hot today. Oh, it's freezing cold today. Oh, it's raining
Yeah.
today. Oh my gosh, the sun is so strong today. It's like no matter what, they're always finding the negative in
It's too
it.
bright.
It's like I know.
So
It's like,
glary.
yeah. Why is it so dark out? The sun's setting so early. It's like no matter what's going on in the
Uh,
weather, everybody always finds a way to complain about it. And the same thing about their health. Like 99% of their body's doing fine, and they're like, "Oh, tennis elbow
yeah.
threw out my back." And it's like,
I bumped my finger.
yeah,
You know, uh, that is so funny, but it's such a good one too, because I think like, like you're right that like the more we remind ourselves to talk positive, even about these little things, the more just it fosters positivity. Like I think we forget that like, we're just the product of whatever we choose to focus on. And like if you constantly are looking at what's negative, you're gonna be negative, I think that's such a good one. And it's so dude, it's so accurate too of what everybody does. Like
yeah.
every time you ask somebody about something, it's like it's too hot, it's too cold, it's too damp, it's too, it's like, well, it can't be
Dude,
perfect
and
all the time.
and it's
So
crazy because like sometimes I'll see people at the office and I'll be like, beautiful day out today, and they're like, yeah, but it's Monday. Ugh. And I'm like, dude, come on. Like 1 out of 7
there's
days is
something
gonna be
wrong.
Monday. You can enjoy it.
Yeah. But isn't that funny? It's like setting yourself up to be miserable all the time. It's so funny, like that we do this intentionally.
Yeah.
God. All right. My second one goes kind of with that, I think, which is just gratitude. I think just reminding to be thankful for stuff, actively making an effort to, look at your life and remind yourself of what's good in it and positive. And I think doing that a lot is just a helpful way. I think we I think I get the impression that we think that people that are positive and stuff have some special gift or have some genetic thing or they're doing something that like we can't do. And the reality is, I think it's just a lot of easy stuff and just repetition and habit until you change your mindset. And I think it's just like willing to commit to it enough. So I think all these little things add up to a much better outlook. So yeah.
Yeah, gratitude is absolutely essential. And it's just something that you need to work on because like there's so many opportunities for things not to be going well. But like in general, most of the stuff is going really good all the time. It's just like the little
Yeah.
1% that we all want to change. But focusing on the stuff that's good, that really makes a huge difference. And it
Oh
is
yeah.
intentional because it doesn't come automatically. And like some days it's more difficult than other days. Some days it's super easy, but some days it's like
Yeah.
really hard to
Yeah.
be grateful. And the I've been experiencing this. Maybe you and some of your listeners will experience it. You're trying to be grateful and you just feel like a turd. And you're like,
Yeah.
come on, these trees are so beautiful. Thank you. Oh, I'm living exactly where I want to. Thank you. Why do I feel like shit? Ah.
Yeah. Well, I think that just goes to show too that it's not like a cure all either. It's like, it takes time and effort. Dude, we have to keep reminding ourselves the same BS every day. I swear. It's like we're constantly fighting our own like innate bitchiness,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. We're just these cranky little creatures whining. Yeah, cranky
Yeah,
little
we
creatures.
are.
Yeah,
Everything's not perfect.
I know, right? So my last one for how to be optimistic is to actually be like a Pollyanna, like see the silver lining in everything, like to the extreme. Be as optimistic as you can be, and do that
Yeah.
first for a day, and then once you get through a day, do it for 3 days, and then do it for a week, and then go back to your being realistic or not being optimistic, and see how actually incredibly negative you were. And this is
Yeah.
like an eye-opening thing because no matter what happens, you can always find some silver lining, some good in it. But we're so used to like picking out. I mean, I make fun of myself for being like a human spell checker. Like I can read an article,
Yeah.
it's perfect, but it has like one letter wrong, and I'm like, saw it, noticed it. I'm like, that's like my brain is trained to just pick out the wrong things. Like
Failure.
I could meet this beautiful girl, and all this stuff is great, but one thing's wrong, and I'm like, sorry. And it's just like it all comes back to what you were talking about with the dichotomy of control, our circle of influence. Like, what do I actually have control over? I have a control over my observations of reality. So I have to make sure that I'm looking at the good stuff because that's
Yeah.
what I want my life to be, good stuff.
No, I think that's true. And it's all just the stories we tell ourselves about things, how we make them meaningful, the role we assign them. That's all it is. And I think it's just about recognizing that we can make it better. we can make this story better or worse, however we want. It just depends on what words we use and the perspective we take. That goes nicely to my last one, which is we're like, all the existentials and all philosophers think we're meaning makers. We are free to interpret the world as we want. And I think remembering this is remembering the role we play in the world that we experience. Remembering that, if I experience a good world, a great world, or a crappy world, that's because of me. That's because I'm interpreting it that way. Now, granted, there's things happening in the world, and if I see a lot of bad things, well, then I can also work to change them. So there's things I can do to make it better. So realizing like our role, I think, is crucial, and realizing that the meaning we see in the world is the story we're telling ourselves. So we need to tell ourselves the right story to have that motivation to keep going and to make things better.
I love that one, our interpretation of things. And like we're the meaning makers. That's a great one. It reminds me, my favorite story from Will Smith's biography was the same story that we all tell ourselves. That like, oh, when I get rich, then I'll be happy. So Will
Yeah,
Smith, he had
yeah,
this whole fantasy because he grew up very poor. He was like, when I get rich, then I'll be happy. And then he got rich and he was still miserable and he realized the problem was himself.
yeah. You know what's funny, dude? I hear it's so funny. I was just talking about that in my class the other day because it's like everybody in America thinks that. Everybody, like my students were saying the same thing. They're like, well, if I had money, then I would be happy. I was like, would you though? Would you really? You don't know that. You're just assuming because that's your biggest hurdle right now. And so obviously, yes, it would reduce stress. It would make things easier. It doesn't mean you would be happy though, because you still bring you to your crappy outlook still coming with you.
Yeah,
You
because once
know,
you get the money, then you start worrying about losing it. It's like,
yeah, and everything else.
yeah,
It's like, yeah.
yeah. Cool.
Uh,
So that in a nutshell is how to be optimistic, or for you negative Nancy's, how to be pessimistic if you did the opposite of everything we
Debbie Downers.
recommended there. Debbie Downers and negative Nancy's. Well, thanks to
Yeah.
all of you Debbie Downers and negative Nancy's for listening to the Existential Stoic podcast. Make sure to check us out on YouTube, all the podcasting services. I'm Randy. That's Danny. I'll see you later, Danny.
Later, Eddie.